The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine landing pad as the alien diplomatic vessel touched down on Earth's first interstellar spaceport. Three tall, blue-skinned beings emerged from their ship, their four-fingered hands raised in peaceful greeting. They were the representatives of the Galactic Union, here for humanity's first cultural exchange program. Ambassador Mark stood at attention, his diplomatic smile well-practiced as he greeted the aliens. "Welcome to Earth," he said, watching their translator devices process his words. "We have prepared a comprehensive tour of our civilization." The lead alien, Admiral Blue, bobbed his head in acknowledgement. "We look forward to understanding your species better," he replied, his voice melodious through the translator. The tour began smoothly enough. The aliens seemed impressed by human architecture, fascinated by parks, and absolutely delighted by ice cream. But everything changed when their vehicle passed by Lincoln High School during the morning rush. Admiral Blue pressed his face against the window. "What is that facility?" "Those small humans are being herded inside by larger ones." Mark smiled proudly. "That's one of our educational institutions, a school where our young learn the skills they need for their future." The vehicle came to a stop as part of the planned tour. The aliens observed the school's security guard checking student IDs at the gate, the high fences surrounding the property, and the cameras mounted on corners. "Those are security measures?" asked the second alien, Dr. Green, his antenna twitching nervously. "Of course," Mark replied. "We must keep our children safe." The third alien, Professor White, was rapidly taking notes on a floating tablet. "Safe from what?" "Oh, preventing them from leaving during school hours, keeping unauthorized people out, maintaining order," Mark explained, not noticing the growing horror on the aliens' faces. The delegation requested to see inside. Mark happily obliged, thinking this was going well. They passed through metal detectors, causing more concerned looks among the visitors. Inside a classroom, 30 students sat in neat rows, their eyes fixed on boards displaying complex mathematics. The teacher stood at the front, maintaining strict silence as the students worked. Admiral Blue's skin turned a pale lavender, a sign of distress that Mark didn't recognize. "They are restrained to these positions." "Well, they need to stay in their seats during lessons," Mark said. "It's how they learn." Dr. Green's antenna went completely straight, another sign of alarm. "For how long are they kept here?" "About 7 hours daily, 5 days a week," Mark answered proudly. "We're actually one of the more progressive nations. Some countries keep them here longer." Professor White's tablet clattered to the floor. 7 hours. They watched as a student raised his hand, asking permission to use the bathroom. The teacher checked the time and nodded approval. That was the breaking point. Admiral Blue turned to his colleagues, speaking rapidly in their native language. Their translator devices caught fragments: containment facility, forced confinement, juvenile detention, barbaric practices. Mark began to sense something was wrong. "Is everything all right?" Admiral Blue drew himself up to his full height, nearly 8 feet tall. "Human Mark, are you telling us that you systematically imprison your young in these facilities across your planet?" "Imprison? No, you misunderstand. They require permission to perform biological functions," Professor White interrupted, his voice shaking. "They are kept in enclosed spaces, under surveillance with restricted movement." "It's for their own good," Mark protested. "How else would they learn?" Dr. Green made a sound that the translator couldn't process. "Learning through imprisonment. Your species confines its young during their most vital developmental period." The school bell rang, making the aliens jump. Students began moving between classes in ordered lines. "We must contact the Galactic Council immediately," Admiral Blue declared. "This requires urgent intervention." As the aliens hurried back to their vehicle, Mark followed, desperately trying to explain. But the damage was done. By sunset, emergency meetings were being called across the galaxy, all focused on one crucial question: How could humanity be so cruel to its own children? The first diplomatic crisis of human-alien relations had begun, and it all started with a simple school tour. The emergency meeting at Earth's diplomatic center was not going well. 3 hours had passed since the school visit, and the alien delegation's distress had only grown worse. They sat at one end of a long table, their skin colors shifting through various shades of distress, while human diplomats occupied the other end. "Please, let us show you more," Director Paul begged, replacing Ambassador Mark, who had been quickly relieved of his duties after the morning's disaster. "There's so much you don't understand about our education system." Admiral Blue's antenna twitched violently. "We have seen enough atrocities for one day. But if you just..." "We will observe one more time," Professor White interrupted. "But if we see more proof of systemic youth imprisonment, we will be forced to take action." The delegation returned to Lincoln High School, this time during standardized testing. It was, as fate would have it, the worst possible timing. They entered a silent hall where hundreds of students sat in rigid rows, separated by dividers, hunched over papers. Proctors patrolled the aisles like guards. No one was allowed to speak, move, or even look around. Dr. Green stumbled backward. "Mass psychological torture," he whispered into his translator. Director Paul felt sweat forming on his forehead. No, these are just tests to measure their progress. You measure their worth through forced isolation and mental strain." Admiral Blue's voice rose several octaves. "Look at their faces. They are suffering." Indeed, many students looked stressed. Some were quietly crying. Others stared blankly into space. One student raised their hand, asking to use the bathroom. "No breaks during the exam," the proctor said firmly. That did it. Dr. Green rushed forward, his medical training taking over. "This is a violation of basic rights. They require biological functions." Security moved to stop him, but Admiral Blue was faster. He raised his arm, activating some sort of device. Suddenly, all the test papers in the room floated into the air. "Run, little ones," he shouted. "You are being liberated." Chaos erupted. Students stared in amazement at the floating papers. Some laughed. Others took out their phones to record the scene. The proctors tried to maintain order while Director Paul frantically called for backup. Professor White accessed the school's speaker system with alien technology. His voice boomed through the halls. "Attention, young humans. You are no longer required to remain in your designated containment areas. You are free." Students poured into the hallways, equal parts confused and amused. The aliens began directing them toward the exits, but most students just stood around, chatting and recording the spectacle on their phones. "Why aren't they running?" Dr. Green asked, baffled. "The restraints are gone." One student, looking up from his phone, shrugged. "Run where? I've got baseball practice after this." "Stockholm Syndrome," Professor White muttered darkly. "They've been institutionalized." The principal arrived, attempting to take control of the situation. "Everyone, please return to your classrooms." To the aliens' horror, most students simply shrugged and started heading back. "No." Admiral Blue's voice thundered. "Don't return to your cells." A student turned to him. "Cells? Dude, it's just 5th period." The aliens huddled together, speaking rapidly in their own language. Their translator picked up fragments. "Mass conditioning. Societal control. Willing captives." Director Paul tried one last time. "Please, this is all a huge misunderstanding. Let us explain our educational philosophy." "Philosophy?" Admiral Blue's skin turned deep purple with emotion. "You call this philosophy? We have seen enough. The Galactic Council will hear of this immediately." As security finally arrived and began restoring order, the alien delegation retreated to their ship, transmitting urgent messages to their homeworld. Behind them, students returned to their tests, many still giggling about the unexpected excitement. That evening, Earth's leaders received a formal warning from the Galactic Council: reform your youth imprisonment systems or face interstellar sanctions. The humans, meanwhile, were left wondering how explaining the concept of high school had somehow brought them to the brink of an interstellar incident. The grand chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with angry voices. Hundreds of alien species filled the massive amphitheater, their varied forms creating a living rainbow of colors and shapes. At the center stage, 3 human representatives stood before the council, trying to explain the concept of schools to increasingly hostile audience. Order, order in the council, boomed the chief speaker, a tall crystalline being who sparkled under the chamber lights. The humans will be allowed to present their defense. Defense Minister James stepped forward, his voice steady despite his nervousness. Honorable Council, there seems to be a grave misunderstanding. Our schools are not prisons. They are centers of learning. Learning through confinement. A tentacled delegate shot back. We have footage of your testing chambers. The massive screens around the chamber displayed images from the high school incident. Students in rows, dividers between them, proctors watching silently. The gathered aliens murmured in horror. Ambassador Lisa tried next. Please understand, our species learns differently from yours. We require structure and... Structure, interrupted a floating gas-based being. Is that what you call forcing young ones to request permission for biological functions? Education Secretary Robert stepped up. If you'd allow me to explain our curriculum. Curriculum of control, shouted someone from the back. They even grade their young, marking them with letters like cattle. The chamber erupted again. The chief speaker had to use sonic dampeners to restore order. Our species, James tried again, evolved as social learners. We gather in groups, share knowledge. Groups? Admiral Blue, now sitting with the council, stood up. You call those rigid rose groups. Where is the interaction? The joy? The freedom? A holographic display activated in the chamber center, showing how different alien species educated their young. Young gas beings floating freely in nebula schools, learning through color changes. Crystalline children growing in gardens, absorbing knowledge through light patterns. Tentacled offspring exploring underwater cities, learning through touch and movement. This is how young ones should learn, the chief speaker declared. Through freedom, through natural curiosity. But our children do have freedom, Lisa protested. They have breaks, playtime. Scheduled freedom is not freedom. Someone shouted, generating another wave of angry agreements. Robert pulled out Earth's educational statistics, projecting them into the air. Look at our progress, our literacy rates, our technological advances. At what cost? Professor White stepped forward. Show them the other statistics. The stress levels, the anxiety rates, the depression in your youth. The chamber grew quieter, more somber. The chief speaker's crystal surface dimmed slightly. Is this true? They asked. James hesitated too long before answering. The chamber erupted once again. We demand immediate intervention. Free the human children. Sanctions must be imposed. The chief speaker raised all 4 arms for silence. Humans, we recognize your species is young in galactic terms. Perhaps you don't know better ways. But this cannot continue. What would you have us do? Lisa asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Simply let our children roam free. Yes, came the unanimous response from the chamber. But they wouldn't learn. They would learn differently, the chief speaker corrected, as all species do. James, Lisa, and Robert huddled together, speaking in whispers. Finally, James turned back to the council. We propose a compromise, he said. Allow us to demonstrate our methods properly, and in return, we will study your educational systems. Perhaps there is a middle ground. The chamber fell silent, considering. The chief speaker's crystal surface shifted through various colors before settling on a calm blue. Agreed, they announced. A joint committee will be formed. You have 1 Earth year to show progress in reforming your schools. If sufficient changes are not made, the council will be forced to act. As the human representatives left the chamber, They could still hear the angry murmurs behind them. They had 1 year to bridge a gap between radically different approaches to learning, or face the consequences of galactic intervention. "Well," Robert said dryly as they walked out, "at least they didn't declare war over our math classes." The old classroom was quiet except for the soft hum of the anti-gravity chairs, where 3 alien delegates floated, watching Mr. Bill Thompson clean his chalkboard. After 40 years of teaching, he had been chosen to explain human education to the aliens. "You see," Bill said, running a hand through his gray hair, "humans aren't born knowing things like your species. We can't absorb knowledge from light or share memories through touch. We have to learn everything the hard way." Admiral Blue drifted closer. "But why force them? Why not let them learn naturally?" Bill walked to the window, pointing at a group of children playing basketball during recess. "Watch them for a moment. What do you see?" The aliens observed as the children argued over rules, organized teams, and started playing. "They create structure themselves," Professor White noted, surprised. "They make rules." "Exactly," Bill smiled. "Humans naturally organize themselves. We create systems, rules, patterns. It's how our minds work." He pulled out an old photo album. "Let me show you something." The images showed children throughout history, in one-room schoolhouses, under trees with simple books, in modern classrooms with computers. "We tried entirely free learning," Bill explained. "It worked for some, but many children fell behind. Some never learned to read. Others couldn't do basic math. In the past, only rich people's children got proper education." Dr. Green's antenna twitched. "But the confinement." "Look at this," Bill interrupted, playing a video on his tablet. It showed his class from last week, students engaged in a group project, laughing, moving around, helping each other. "This is also school. We don't just sit in rows all day. The structure exists to ensure everyone has a chance to learn, not to punish." Admiral Blue floated down to examine a student's art project on the wall. "But the tests, the stress." Bill sighed. "Yes, that's something we're still working on. But consider this, when your doctor performs surgery, don't you want to know they passed their medical tests? When your pilot flies a spacecraft, don't you want proof they understand navigation?" The aliens fell silent, considering. "Let me tell you about Maria," Bill continued, pointing to a photo of a smiling graduate. "She came from a poor family. Without public schools, she might never have learned to read. Now she's a scientist, working on interstellar engines." He walked to his desk, pulling out more photos. "And Jack, who thought he couldn't learn math until we found out he needed glasses. And Tony, who discovered his love for biology in this very lab." Professor White's tablet floated forgotten beside him. "But our scans showed such high stress levels." "Yes," Bill admitted. "We're not perfect. Our system needs improvement. But consider this. When humans want to learn something, really learn it, we seek out teachers. We create schools. Even adults do this voluntarily." He showed them advertisements for adult education classes, cooking schools, art workshops. "Your species learns through freedom," Bill said gently. "Ours often learns best through guidance. Different species, different needs." Admiral Blue's color shifted to a thoughtful shade. "You're saying structure isn't always imprisonment?" "Sometimes it's a ladder," Bill replied. "It helps us climb higher than we could alone." The aliens huddled together, discussing in their own language. Finally, they turned back to Bill. "We still have concerns," Admiral Blue said. "But perhaps we were too quick to judge. Tell us more about these ladders." Bill smiled, picking up a piece of chalk. "Let me show you how humans taught each other before we had schools. Maybe understanding our past will help you understand our present." As he began drawing on the board, the aliens watched with new interest. Outside, the basketball game continued, its self-imposed rules and structure creating not imprisonment, but possibility. "Perhaps," Dr. Green whispered to his colleagues, We have something to learn from them as well. For the first time since the crisis began, both species were starting to understand each other. It wasn't perfect agreement, but it was a start. The experimental classroom looked nothing like a traditional school. Half the room was filled with standard desks, while the other half featured alien learning pods that gently floated in the air. 20 human children and 5 young aliens moved freely between both sections, their excited chatter filling the air. "It's working better than we expected," Project Director Mike said, watching through the observation window. Behind him, members of the Joint Education Committee, both human and alien, took notes. Inside, a human teacher named Mrs. Anna worked alongside an alien educator named Light Weaver. They had just started a lesson about solar systems. "Today, you can choose," Mrs. Anna announced. "You can learn through Earth-style models and books, or try the alien light learning pods." Some students rushed to the pods, where they could experience floating through space. Others preferred sitting at desks, building physical models of planets. A few moved back and forth between both. "Fascinating," Admiral Blue muttered, watching a human child successfully use a light pod for the first time. They adapt so quickly. The committee had spent 3 months developing this hybrid system. It hadn't been easy. The aliens had to modify their technology to work with human biology. The humans had to relax many traditional school rules. "Look at their stress levels," Dr. Green said excitedly, checking his scanner. "Much lower than traditional schools, yet learning retention is higher." A young alien student raised all 4 hands. "Mrs. Anna, can I try the human way? I like building things with my hands." "Of course," she smiled. "That's what this class is all about, finding how you learn best." In one corner, a human boy struggled with the light pod. Light Weaver floated over. "Try closing your eyes," they suggested. Human minds sometimes learn better that way. The committee watched as the boy's face lit up when he finally grasped the concept. "We're seeing interesting patterns," Professor White observed. "Some humans actually learn better using our methods, while some of our young are fascinated by human hands-on approaches." The classroom had other changes too. Students could take breaks when they needed them. The rigid class schedule was replaced with flexible learning periods. Traditional tests were mixed with alien assessment methods that measured understanding through experience rather than written answers. "There are challenges," Mike admitted. "Some parents worry it's not strict enough. Some alien families think it's still too structured. But look at the results." He displayed the first month's data. Students in the hybrid program were learning faster, showing more creativity, and most importantly, enjoying the process. The key was choice, Mrs. Anna explained during her break. When students can choose how they learn, they take ownership of their education. Light Weaver bobbed in agreement, and structure isn't bad when it's chosen, not forced. Even our young ones sometimes prefer human-style organization. The bell rang, a gentle musical tone now, not the harsh buzz of old. Students began gathering their things, talking excitedly about what they'd learned. "Can we try the pods again tomorrow?" one human girl asked. "And I want to build more models," an alien child chimed in. Admiral Blue's color shifted to a happy pink. "Perhaps we judged too harshly. Your species doesn't imprison its young. You just needed better options. And we needed to learn from you," Mike replied. "Our old system was too rigid, too one-size-fits-all." The committee began drafting their report to the Galactic Council. The hybrid program would be expanded to more schools. Earth would keep some traditional elements that worked well, while incorporating alien learning technology. The aliens would adapt some human teaching methods for their own young. As they wrote, a small commotion drew their attention back to the classroom. A human boy had discovered he could use the light pod and build the physical model simultaneously, creating something entirely new. Now that, Light Weaver said proudly, is true learning. The first real bridge between human and alien education had been built. It wasn't perfect, but it was proving something important. Sometimes the best solution isn't choosing one way or another, but finding a new path altogether. 6 months into the hybrid education program, change was spreading across Earth faster than anyone had expected. The success of the first experimental classroom had sparked a revolution in learning that no one could ignore. Inside New Horizons School, formerly Lincoln High, Principal Ted stood before a crowd of nervous parents and curious aliens, giving a tour of the transformed building. As you can see, he gestured to a classroom where students worked in small groups, some floating in pods, others at traditional desks. We've maintained academic standards while embracing new methods. A parent raised her hand. But what about college preparation? Will universities accept these new learning styles? Before Ted could answer, a holographic message appeared. It was the Dean of Oxford University. "We're not just accepting them," the Dean announced. "We're adapting our own programs to match." The results are too good to ignore. The statistics were impressive. Student engagement was up 80%. Test scores had improved, even though traditional testing was now only one of many assessment methods. Most surprisingly, student anxiety levels had dropped by 65%. In another classroom, a teenager named Jack was teaching an alien student how to play chess, while the alien showed Jack how to share memories through light patterns. Both were learning each other's languages in the process. The breakthrough wasn't just in education. Research director Amy explained to visiting scientists. "We discovered that human brains could adapt to alien learning methods, and aliens could benefit from human teaching styles. Both species had something valuable to offer." Not everyone embraced the changes. Some traditional schools refused to adopt the new methods. A group of protesters stood outside New Horizons each morning, holding signs that read, "Keep Earth Schools Earth." But they were fighting a losing battle. Students in hybrid programs were consistently outperforming those in traditional schools. More importantly, they were happier. "Watch this," Professor White said excitedly, showing brain scans to the Galactic Council's Education Committee. "When humans learn through our light pods while simultaneously using their hands-on methods, both hemispheres of their brains light up in ways we've never seen before." The hybrid system kept evolving. Some schools developed underwater learning chambers based on aquatic alien teaching methods. Others incorporated crystal resonance chambers that taught through vibration and sound. Each school was different now. Some remained mostly traditional with just a few alien elements. Others went fully hybrid. Parents and students could choose what worked best for them. The key was stopping the one-size-fits-all approach, Ted explained to a news crew. "We kept what worked from our old system, but weren't afraid to try new things." In the teacher's lounge, Mrs. Anna sat with Lightweaver, planning the next day's lesson. "Remember when aliens thought we were running prisons?" She laughed. Lightweaver's color shifted to amused purple. "Remember when we tried to liberate your students, and they just wanted to finish their baseball practice?" Both teachers watched through the window as students left for the day. Some took traditional buses, others used small anti-gravity platforms. Many stay for afternoon programs that mixed Earth sports with alien recreational activities. "There's still work to do," Principal Ted told the touring group. "We're learning new things every day. But look at them." He pointed to a group of human and alien students working together on a project, seamlessly switching between different learning methods. "This is the future of education." A small alien child floated up to Ted. "Can I show them my history project?" she asked excitedly. "I used human books and memory sharing." As the child demonstrated her project, a stunning combination of physical diorama and telepathic experience, the watching parents began to relax. Even the most skeptical could see that their children weren't losing anything. Instead, they were gaining a whole universe of ways to learn. Outside the school, a new sign had replaced the old one. It read, "New Horizons School, where all methods lead to learning." The education revolution had begun, and there was no going back. 5 years after the Great Education Crisis, the first graduation ceremony of New Horizons School looked very different from traditional graduations of the past. The school's anti-gravity auditorium floated gently above the ground. filled with a mix of human and alien families. Remember when they wanted to impose sanctions on us for our education system? Principal Ted whispered to Admiral Blue, who now served as the head of the Galactic Education Council. One of our biggest misunderstandings, Admiral Blue replied, his skin glowing with pride. And now look, over 50 alien species have adopted parts of the human education model. On stage, the valedictorian Rose stepped up to the floating podium. Unlike past speeches, hers would be delivered in 3 formats simultaneously: spoken words, light patterns, and telepathic sharing. 5 years ago, she began, her words translating across all communication methods. 2 civilizations clashed over how to teach their young. Today, we celebrate not just our graduation, but the birth of something entirely new. The audience watched in amazement as she demonstrated her combined learning. She solved complex equations while floating in a light pod, wrote poetry using both human words and alien light patterns, and shared historical experiences through multiple sensory channels. We aren't just students anymore, Rose continued. We're pioneers of a new way of learning. Some of us will attend Earth universities, others will study in alien academies. Many of us will do both. In the audience, Professor White reviewed the final statistics on his tablet. The hybrid education system had produced remarkable results. Students were now multilingual across species, capable of learning through dozens of different methods, and showed unprecedented levels of creative problem-solving. The biggest surprise, he whispered to his colleagues, was how many alien worlds started building traditional human libraries. They fell in love with physical books. The ceremony continued with each graduate demonstrating their unique learning journey. One student had combined Earth music with alien light harmonies to create a new art form. Another had developed a mathematical system that worked across all known species counting methods. But our greatest achievement, Rose said, nearing the end of her speech, wasn't academic. It was learning to see through each other's eyes, to understand that different doesn't mean wrong, that there are countless paths to knowledge. The audience erupted in applause, humans clapping, aliens glowing, some species singing in pure joy. Director Paul, the same man who had faced the Galactic Council's anger 5 years ago, stood up to make the final speech. When aliens first saw our schools, they thought they were prisons, he said, causing knowing laughter. Today, educational delegations from across the galaxy visit Earth to study our hybrid systems. We didn't just change our schools, we started an interstellar education revolution. As if to prove his point, a holographic message appeared above the auditorium. It showed classes across the galaxy, crystal beings studying human literature, gas-form entities learning Earth mathematics, and human exchange students on distant worlds mastering alien sciences. And this is just the beginning, Admiral Blue announced. Next year, we open the first galactic university on Earth, combining all known teaching methods from across the universe. The graduates stood for their final moment. Instead of traditional caps, they wore devices that displayed their achievements in ways all species could understand. As they celebrated, their combined joy created a light show that lit up the evening sky. Later, at the reception, human and alien families shared food, stories, and learning experiences. Young siblings of graduates played with alien children, naturally switching between different communication methods. Hard to believe you once thought we were running prison camps, Principal Ted said to Admiral Blue. The Admiral's color shifted to embarrassed purple. Hard to believe you once thought sitting in rows was the only way to learn. They watched as Rose demonstrated her light pod skills to a group of younger students, her earlier nervousness replaced with confident joy. So what do we call this new system? Someone asked. Principal Ted smiled, watching humans and aliens learning, growing, and sharing together. We don't need to call it anything. It's just education as it should be, open to all methods, all species, all possibilities. Above them, the stars twinkled with promise, each one potentially holding new ways of learning yet to be discovered.